Okay, in this video, we're going to look at errors and other issues that may arise during the sampling process. So, no matter how well designed a study or an experiment can be, there's always room for error. And sometimes you catch the error, other times you don't. But just be advised that there's issues and errors that come up all the time. And um, we try to minimize them if we can, but just be advised that they will come up, and how do we handle those? So, our first type of error that we're going to discuss called sampling error, and that's really where it's the difference between the results you get for the sample versus the true results of the population. So remember, we take samples to get information about a population, especially when it's difficult to obtain information about the entire excuse me, the entire population. So our results that we get for our sample or samples and the actual true results of the population, the difference between those two results is referred to as our sampling error. We also have what's known as non-sampling error, where the sample data, something's wrong with it. So it's either wasn't collected the right way, it wasn't recorded, or was misrecorded, or maybe the analysis that was used was incorrect. Might have been a bug in the computer program that analyzed the data, or whatever the case may be. But that's error that typically is human cause. So try to avoid that if possible. And then not using randomness. We want to get a random sample somehow, and even if it's something where it's stratified or cluster, it's still stratified and cluster sampling still incorporates randomness into the process. So if things aren't done randomly, then there's a lot of room for bias, which is favoritism, in a certain direction, which we want to avoid in terms of getting information about a population. So avoid, or take with a very healthy dose of skepticism, any sample data that doesn't have some component of randomness to it. So like convenience sampling or voluntary response sampling, those are ones you would either want to avoid completely or take with a very healthy dose of skepticism. Some other issues that arise are small sample sizes, and again, we want to make sure that our sample size is large enough to include a variety of data that is about the population. Now, I've said this in the past, in the last video actually, about sample sizes as well, and you might have, the question on your mind might be, well, how do I know if the sample size is large enough to sufficiently represent the population? Well, the good news is we're going to talk about that later on in this course. So in a future video, I'm sorry to say, we'll talk about how to calculate the proper sample size to be within a certain percentage of what you need. We'll say that for right now. Another issue that arises are non-responses, which is when someone either refuses to respond to a question or the information is unavailable. Unfortunately, it does happen quite a bit, and to capitalize on that issue of non-responses is for those missing data values, how are they handled? Are they handled as not applicable n/A, not applicable, or are they treated as zeros? So, for instance, if we're looking at calculating the average amount of rainfall in an area, what happens if we have missing data values? Do we include that as not available and not use it, or do we fill it in as a zero and count that as a zero? So it's a matter of how you're going to address those issues when doing any kind of study or experiment. Another issue that arises is the issue of a loaded question, which is a question that is worded to either mislead or elicit a desired response from the subject. So typically with observational studies and questionnaires and surveys, some of the questions might be worded in a way that is trying to get the subject to say a certain response to it, so that way the researcher can sort of get the answers that they want versus the answers that they need. So example 3, which of the following is a loaded question? So statement one is, or question one here is, should the fire department receive additional funding for new equipment? And question two, statement two is, should taxpayers be responsible for new fire department equipment? So which of the following do you think is a loaded question that's designed to either mislead or elicit a response, a prescribed response? So is it the first one or the second one? Well, let's see if you're right. It's actually statement two. Statement two talks about should taxpayers be responsible for, and while it's true that many fire departments do rely on taxpayer revenue, the inclusion of should taxpayers be responsible really is designed to get people to remember that, oh yeah, it's your tax dollars that are going to cost you for new fire department equipment. So in terms of what is a non-loaded question, is question one, should the fire department receive additional funding for new equipment? To look at it on another from another point of view, another example of a loaded question would be, should the fire department receive additional funding for new equipment to help save lives? The to help save lives is added into elicit a desired response. So try to be as objective with any kind of questions that are asked as you possibly can. The more objective, the better. So, but be aware that loaded questions do exist, and if you're designing a study or anything like that, or even an experiment, try to avoid using loaded questions if at all possible. All right, well, that about does it for this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.